Silence isn't just the absence of words. It's a presence that speaks volumes. When a man who once poured his attention, texts, and energy into a woman suddenly goes quiet, it creates a shift. It's not just noticed, it's deeply felt. Female psychology is wired to seek emotional feedback and validation, especially from someone she has grown used to receiving consistent communication from. So, when that pattern breaks and silence enters the space, something powerful begins to happen in her mind. She starts to feel the absence as strongly as she once felt your presence. And what makes this even more intense is that she doesn't always realize how much your presence impacted her until it's gone. When you go silent, it forces her into a space of emotional reflection. And like men, who often retreat to process their thoughts logically, many women are conditioned to analyze emotions in relationships. So your silence becomes a riddle she feels compelled to solve. Why isn't he calling? What happened? Did I say something wrong? Her mind begins running through past conversations, body language, your last text, and any subtle change in tone. That silence starts echoing in her head, louder than any words you could have spoken. And this isn't about mind games. It's about understanding the deep emotional responses that get triggered when a pattern breaks, especially when that pattern once gave her comfort or validation. See, when you're constantly available, always replying, always initiating, you become predictable. And while consistency is good, predictability without emotional polarity can sometimes dull attraction. But when you withdraw your energy, not in anger, not in manipulation, but in grounded self-respect, you create contrast. That contrast gives her room to feel your value through your absence. It makes her question things she once took for granted. In that space of silence, her emotional state becomes unsettled, not necessarily in a negative way, but in a way that brings your presence back into sharp focus. This is especially true in a world flooded with noise, endless notifications, social media, and instant replies. Silence becomes rare, it becomes powerful. And when a man uses it not to punish but to realign, it triggers an ancient part of the female psyche, one that is alert to emotional shifts in her environment. Suddenly, you're not just another voice in her day, you're the missing voice she keeps checking her phone for. And that's where the power lies, not in making her chase, but in creating emotional space where she recognizes your absence as meaningful. It's important, though, to understand the difference between intentional silence and emotional immaturity. Ghosting out of anger or disappearing with the hope of manipulating her feelings backfires. But when your silence comes from a place of self-worth, emotional clarity, and the desire to shift the dynamic in a healthier direction, it has the power to reset everything. It reminds her of your value without needing to shout it. It shows her you're not afraid to walk away if the energy isn't mutual, and that creates a level of respect no amount of sweet words can buy. In the end, silence done right doesn't push her away. It pulls her in. It stirs something deeper than charm ever could. When you suddenly go silent, one of the first things that happens inside her mind is a deep emotional shift. She starts overthinking. It's almost automatic. Women, by nature and nurture, are more emotionally attuned to the energy in a relationship. They're trained from a young age to notice the subtle cues, changes in tone, and emotional patterns. So when a man who used to engage, text, call, or initiate suddenly steps back and says nothing at all, it triggers something powerful. Her inner dialogue turns up to full volume. She starts asking herself questions. Did I say something wrong? Was he upset? Is he losing interest in me? And those questions don't come gently. They come fast, layered with emotion, and they don't go away easily. You see, her mind becomes a storm of possibilities, rewinding every recent moment she shared with you. She replays your last conversation. She overanalyzes your last message, your facial expressions, the timing of your silence. Silence, especially when unexpected, creates uncertainty. And for many women, uncertainty isn't just uncomfortable, it can be emotionally consuming. Her thoughts don't just stay on you for a second, they loop. The more silence you maintain, the louder those loops get. Not because she's weak or overly sensitive, but because the emotional connection she felt with you has been suddenly interrupted, and now she's trying to make sense of that gap. This is where things get really interesting. That overthinking doesn't just affect how she views the situation. It starts affecting how she views herself. She begins questioning her own worth, her own behavior, her own attractiveness. Was I too much? Did I push him away? Am I not good enough? These thoughts can dig deep, especially if she's emotionally invested. And ironically, the more she tries to rationalize it, the deeper the emotional spiral becomes. She's not just wondering what happened to you. She's now trying to fix something she doesn't fully understand, which makes your silence even more powerful. And here's the truth, that overthinking often leads to a longing. Because when she's stuck in her head, trying to solve the mystery of your silence, she starts to miss the certainty and attention she once had from you. That missing piece becomes something she craves again, not because of a game you're playing, but because emotional consistency followed by silence creates a contrast she can't ignore. It's like a light going out in a room she didn't know she was relying on, and now she's stumbling in the dark trying to find the switch again. What makes this even more compelling is that she won't always show it. On the outside, she might act like she doesn't care. She might post something to seem unbothered, but inside, her mind is busy. She's thinking about you more than she'd ever admit. That's the power of strategic silence. It makes her feel your absence in a way your words never could. It doesn't just make her curious, it makes her emotionally invested all over again. When you go silent, it doesn't always push her away. It often triggers something deeper. She begins to test you, sometimes without even realizing she's doing it. Female psychology, especially when it comes to relationships, is deeply tied to emotional security and response. When a man becomes quiet or distant, it shifts the emotional equilibrium, and her mind begins searching for answers. But if no answers are found, she may begin creating emotional tests to feel out your position, your strength, your intentions. These tests aren't always conscious or malicious. In many cases, they come from a place of vulnerability. She's trying to see if you're still emotionally present, still interested, or if she needs to prepare for emotional disconnection. These tests can take many forms. Maybe she suddenly becomes colder or pulls back even more. Maybe she acts like she doesn't care, just to see if you'll chase her. She might ignore your stories, stop reacting to your posts, or send a subtle message that seems casual but is really bait. All of these small behaviors are meant to provoke a reaction, not because she's playing games, but because she's looking for a sign. Silence from a man she was once emotionally connected to doesn't sit still in her heart. It moves her into a place of uncertainty, and that uncertainty often leads to testing boundaries. Now here's where most men get it wrong. They either react too quickly, trying to fix the emotional gap by over-explaining, apologizing, or rushing back in with energy that feels needy, or they get frustrated by her behavior and retaliate, turning the silence into a battleground. but neither response works in your favor. What actually deepens her respect and attraction is when you remain calm, steady, and emotionally grounded. When you pass the test not by chasing, but by showing that you're unshaken by her shifts, you demonstrate something rare, masculine emotional control. And believe me, that hits differently than charm or flattery ever could. Women test what they're attracted to. They don't test what they've already dismissed. That's why her testing you is not a sign of rejection. It's a sign she still cares, but isn't sure where you stand. It's her way of measuring your emotional strength. Are you a man who reacts from insecurity, or do you lead from inner certainty? If she pulls back and you chase, it validates her fears. But if she pulls back and you remain composed, she's forced to reevaluate. That makes your silence powerful, not because it creates distance, but because it reveals truth. It reveals whether the connection was one-sided or mutual. It reveals who responds from emotion and who moves with intention. These moments are critical in shaping how she sees you. Not just in the present, but long term. Women remember the man who didn't crumble when tested. They remember the man who didn't beg for attention, but let her come to her own emotional realization. And when that realization comes, it hits harder because it wasn't force. It was earned through the power of your silence and the strength of your presence without words. When you pull back and go silent, it often causes her to mirror your behavior, not as a strategy, but as a form of emotional self-protection. At first, she may overthink and test you, but if those efforts don't bring clarity or reassurance, she begins to shut down emotionally. That's where mirroring comes in. She starts to reflect your silence, pulling away not because she wants to punish you, but because she's protecting herself from feeling rejected, hurt, or exposed. This is a psychological defense mechanism rooted in self-preservation. In her mind, silence becomes a signal that maybe you're no longer interested, and to avoid appearing vulnerable or needy, she matches your distance with her own. This is one of the most misunderstood reactions in modern relationships. Many men see her sudden coldness or lack of communication as a sign she doesn't care anymore, but in reality, it's often the opposite. She cared enough to notice the shift, to feel the emotional absence, and then to emotionally withdraw to avoid further pain. Her mirroring isn't indifference, it's a quiet form of emotional survival. And the more invested she was in the connection, the more likely she is to mirror your silence instead of confront it head on. She doesn't want to beg. She doesn't want to be the only one holding on. So instead, she mirrors you to see if your silence was permanent, or if you were just testing the waters. This mirroring can be subtle or obvious. Maybe she starts responding with shorter texts. Maybe she stops initiating. Maybe she doesn't react to your stories, photos, or posts like she used to. From the outside, it might seem like she's lost interest. But inside, she's likely thinking, if he wanted to talk to me, he would. If he cared, he'd reach out. If I matter, I won't have to chase him. That's the silent narrative playing out in her mind, and it often grows louder with time. But here's where the emotional tension builds. When both people go silent, each waiting on the other to make a move, connection slowly fades. Not because the feelings disappear, but because pride, fear, and emotional self-protection block vulnerability. And while you may feel strong in your silence, believing that your pullback was necessary, she may be silently waiting for a signal that it was safe to open up again. Without it, her mirroring hardens into distance, and distance turns into disconnection. The key to understanding this stage is realizing that silence is not always a power move. It can also be a reflection of unspoken emotional needs. Her mirroring you is her way of asking, "Are we still in this?" without having to speak those words. And depending on how emotionally mature and confident she is, that silence could either be her final wall or a temporary retreat waiting for your clarity. The point isn't to break your silence with desperation, but to understand what her mirrored distance really means. Sometimes it's a test, sometimes it's self-protection, and sometimes it's an invitation for you to lead with strength, clarity, and intention. When you go silent, something unexpected often happens. Her respect for you starts to shift. It can grow, deepen, and in some cases, completely transform the way she sees you. But that only happens when the silence comes from a place of emotional strength and self-respect. There's a big difference between disappearing because you're playing games and going quiet because you're grounded in who you are and what you will or won't accept. That kind of silence speaks directly to something deeper in her, something that responds not just to what you say, but to how you carry yourself. Most men are taught that in order to be respected or loved, they have to always be available, always responsive, always showing up no matter what. But the truth is, over-availability can sometimes backfire. It can make you look overly eager, or worse, desperate. And nothing kills respect faster than desperation. When you're always the one initiating, always chasing, always fixing without taking time to check if your energy is being matched, you slowly train her to take your presence for granted. But when you pull back and allow silence to do the talking, it changes the dynamic completely. Silence, when done right, shows that you're emotionally disciplined. You're not reactive, you're not begging for attention, you're not chasing someone who's not meeting you halfway. And in today's culture, where constant communication and instant gratification are expected, that kind of composure stands out. It tells her that you're not afraid of being alone, that you value your time and energy, and that you won't lower your standards just to keep the peace. That kind of energy demands respect not because you force it, but because you embody it. This doesn't mean you become cold or unkind. It means your silence sends a message. I'm not here to play games, and I'm not afraid to walk away from anything that doesn't align with my peace. That's powerful. Women are naturally drawn to strength, not just physical strength, but emotional strength. The ability to remain grounded, non-reactive, and self-contained is incredibly attractive because it signals maturity and self-worth. Over time, this kind of silence reshapes the entire relationship dynamic. Instead of viewing you as someone who's always available and easy to reach, she begins to see you as someone she doesn't want to lose. Someone who respects himself enough not to stay where he isn't fully valued, and that respect turns into attraction. It's not about manipulation. It's about demonstrating that your silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning. You're not punishing her, you're protecting your peace. When she sees that you're not moved by emotional highs and lows, that you're not shaken by silence or distance, it forces her to look at you differently. She realizes you're not like the rest. You're not trying to prove yourself with words. You let your actions and your absence do the work. And often, that silent strength is what finally makes her see your value in a way she couldn't before. Silence, when used intentionally, has the power to reignite attraction, but only if you follow it with the right move. You see, silence alone can stir curiosity, create emotional space, and even trigger her to start questioning the connection. But what truly shifts the dynamic and brings her closer is what happens asterisk after asterisk the silence. Most men don't understand this. They either stay silent for too long, letting the connection completely fade, or they come back too soon, breaking the tension before it reaches its emotional peak. But if you know how to step back in at the right moment with presence, clarity, and calm strength, you reignite something far deeper than surface level attention. During the silence, she's been overthinking, testing, maybe even mirroring your behavior. But beneath all of that, she's still emotionally connected to you. That means the attraction hasn't disappeared. It's been simmering in the background, waiting for something to shift. And that shift comes when you re-enter her space, not with desperate energy or chasing words, but with calm confidence. You're not trying to explain everything. You're not apologizing for going silent. You simply show up as a man who knows who he is and isn't afraid of distance. That kind of re-entry hits differently. It could be as simple